I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy.
You can find previous podcasts and more information on a range of health topics at peoplespharmacy.com. Americans keep flip-flopping on food. For years, experts recommended low-fat diets. Now, the pendulum has swung back. This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
The new dietary guidelines for Americans prioritize protein, especially animal protein. They also encourage us to eat real food. What does that mean?
Our guest today is one of the country's leading nutrition researchers. He will explain the changes in these new recommendations.
Will the new guidelines change the way you eat and feed your family?
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, learn about the food fight. Should we flip the food pyramid upside down?
In the People's Pharmacy Health Headlines, many medical professionals are skeptical about the value of multivitamins. A fresh analysis of data from the COSMOS trial of multivitamins and cocoflavanols now suggests that the multivitamin-multimineral combination used in the study slowed aging. The conclusion is based on almost 1,000 study volunteers with an average age of 70. Compared to those taking placebo tablets, those on the multi for 2 years aged more slowly according to two markers of biological aging. In addition to slower aging, those in the vitamin supplement arm of the study had lower inflammation and better cognitive function. Epigenetic aging clocks are not perfect, but they do offer some sense of how fast a person is aging relative to chronological age. The slowing was small, between 1/10 and 2/10 of a year. People whose aging was accelerated before the study began got the most noticeable benefit from multivitamin action. The researchers suggest that aging more slowly in this way could translate to a somewhat lower risk of cancer. The authors summarized, "In conclusion, we provide evidence from a large-scale and long-term randomized controlled trial that a daily multivitamin and mineral combination is a safe, readily accessible, and low-cost intervention that may slow epigenetic aging."
There's something that might make you age faster at the cellular level. If you have difficult people in your life who create problems, they could be aging you at a faster rate than normal. These hasslers seemingly create biological aging in those around them. The study involved 2,345 participants ranging in age from 18 to 103 years old. The researchers measured cumulative biological aging data. Hasslers were defined as people causing problems or making life difficult. The negative interactions could range from everyday irritations and criticism to exclusion, hostility, denunciations, or even violence. The people who participated in the study reported that, on average, they experienced 8.1% of their network members as hasslers. The more hasslers in your life, the more pronounced the aging effect. People who make you feel bad may add roughly 9 months of biological age to your life. The authors suggest avoiding hasslers whenever possible and seeking out people who are supportive.
There's a common perception that getting older means you lose your edge and start to fall apart. But what if we viewed aging as an opportunity for improvement instead? A new study published in the journal Geriatrics suggests that some of us become healthier and more creative as we age. The key seems to be in our attitude. Participants enrolled in the Health and Retirement Study and took tests of cognitive ability and walking speed. Their average age at the start of the study was 68 years. After a follow-up of up to 12 years, researchers repeated the assessment on more than 11,000 people. These volunteers had also recorded their beliefs about the aging process.
Almost half, 45% of the participants, showed improvement in either cognitive performance or walking speed, or both. If the investigators also included people who stayed the same after several years, the proportion of those who did not decline with age was over half. Significantly, more of the people who improved had expressed positive views of aging at the outset of the study.
Children in North America eat a lot of junk food. A study notes that nearly half of the calories consumed by Canadian preschoolers come from ultra processed foods. The investigators wanted to know whether such a diet affects emotional and behavioral functioning. They found that ultra processed food consumption at age 3 is associated with greater anxiety, fearfulness, and depression at age 5. These results parallel those from a British study linking burgers, fried chicken, potato chips, and chocolate to hyperactivity at age 7. The author suggests that feeding young children less ultra-processed foods could result in better mental health as they grow older. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. Americans have been fighting about food for decades. First, eggs were bad. Now they're good. Olive oil was too high in saturated fat. Now it's a cornerstone of the preferred Mediterranean diet.
The latest version of dietary guidelines for Americans is controversial. It was presented with a graphic that turns the food pyramid upside down. What should you know about healthy eating?
To help us answer that question, we turn to Dr. Christopher Gardner. Professor Gardner is a leading nutrition researcher. He's the director of nutrition studies at the Stanford Prevention Research Center and the Renborg Farquhar Professor of Medicine at Stanford University.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Christopher Gardner.
Joe and Terry, thanks for having me back.
Christopher, it is so good to have you back on the People's Pharmacy. It's been far too long, and so much has happened in the world of food. So let's just start at the beginning. There's a lot of confusion and emotion around food in general. It's so complicated. Our grandparents, they had it so simple.
Yeah.
They went out to the garden, they cooked what was available. There was no controversy about good foods and bad foods. So we're going to start right off with the dietary guidelines. Who sets them up?
Oh, yeah. So the secretaries of Agriculture and Health and Human Services have shared that responsibility since the beginning, which is a little odd because it seems like it should be Health and Human Services, given that the agricultural community has an obvious conflict of interest. But that's the short answer.
That definitely makes it more complicated, I think, for them to be able to collaborate on these guidelines. What are the guidelines supposed to do?
Terry, before that, why do they have a conflict of interest?
Okay.
Right. So you can't, let's say you represent the cattlemen's industry and the pork industry and the egg industry, and the scientists say you should eat less of something. Wow, that would work against your interest to tell somebody that you represent that the whole American public should eat less of you. But if you're a vegetable and fruit growing type person and the scientists say eat more veggies and fruits, well, it's easy to suggest eating more of someone you represent, but not less.
Keep going.
I just wanted to know why it was conflict. Back to your question.
Well, it sounds as though this dietary guideline project has been complicated right from the beginning. If they've had to collaborate from the beginning, what is the function of the dietary guidelines? What's the big idea?
Yeah, so great question. So there's a whole story that Marion Nestle is the best at explaining of why they originated in 1980. But when they did originate in 1980, they made a deal, or it was part of their write-up, that every 5 years, just in case there was new science, they would update them. And so there have been updates every 5 years since 1980. And the way they've gone about this over the last 20 years or so, not necessarily in the beginning, was they would get together a group of scientists and refer to them as the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. And for 2 years, that group would review any new papers that came out since the last time they were issued. And the group would submit an advisory report to the secretaries of Ag and Health and Human Services. And as an advisory, they didn't have to take the advice. And over time, there's many times they did not take the advice, but many times they did take the advice. And then it was really USDA and HHS that issued those guidelines sometime the next year after they got this report. And I have lots of details to share with you about what happened this time, but that's the short answer.
Well, before we get to what happened, what's the point? I mean, why do we even have dietary guidelines, and what are they supposed to do for American health?
I'm really glad that you started there. So it is kind of interesting that when you read these, every time they've been reissued, the very beginning says these particular guidelines are really not for the American public to read. A lot of scientific work went into this. A lot of the language is rather technical. So this is really for health professionals and policymakers. It's a really long, boring document. But at its best, what it does is it informs federal safety net programs. So if you're thinking school lunch, school breakfast, women, infants, and children, there's really about 20 to 25 federal safety net programs to help people who don't have enough to eat. And so when you're trying to provide more food for those in need, there's some guidelines that say, well, you should make sure you emphasize this and try to avoid that, because we would like these people getting federal assistance to get healthy choices. So the biggest impact of those dietary guidelines is actually on like kids getting school lunch and school breakfast, not so much the general public. And it's well known that if you look at what's been stated in the dietary guidelines, because this is actually part of the advisory group's responsibility every 5 years to get a hint of how America is eating. And that's done by looking at something called the Healthy Eating Index. And actually people go through group by group, the veggies, then the fruits, then the grains, then the meat, then the dairy. And Americans for a long time have not followed the dietary guidelines, which is a super interesting part because quite often some social influencers have said, oh my God, the dietary guidelines as written are killing us. We have an obesity epidemic, a diabetes epidemic. Oh my God, we better change them. And the typical response among those who made them is, well, people aren't following them. Well, it's not following them that made them sick. We have them available, but most people don't follow them. So that would be an interesting experiment if we check their health after they did.
So you can have good advice to look both ways before you cross the street. And if you fail to look both ways, you just ignore that and look at your phone instead while you're crossing the street and you get run over. You can't really blame the guidelines, right?
Exactly. That's been a very frustrating point to try to deal with social influencer lately. And it's actually just led to more confusion than is necessary.
Well, Dr. Gardner, you mentioned that these guidelines traditionally are long, boring documents. Long, I mean 100 pages or so. And apparently, the most recent ones are a lot shorter, like maybe 10 pages. Can you tell us how they have changed the advice from the previous set of guidelines?
And why are they so controversial?
Yep. Okay, so picture the last guidelines were 164 pages from 2020. But actually, the government put together all kinds of short versions of those, depending on who the audience was. There's a 5 and a 10-page version. And if you look at all the marketers and the communicators, they set up different length documents depending who they were targeting. And this particular one, I honestly thought it was 12, but maybe it's 10 pages. I think the one I have is 12 pages long. That sounds much shorter, but there's a 90-page document that goes with it. And there's also a 400-page document that goes with it. If you want even more detail and to put that in perspective, I worked on the 2025 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. We generated a 421-page report with a 1,000-page supplement that went into the details. And I could probably pretty quickly explain why it's so long if you want me to go there.
Well, I think everybody has heard by now about the food pyramid. And so I think the food pyramid kind of boils down the dietary guidelines to something that doctors and patients and just the rest of us can kind of make sense of. But this new food pyramid has got everybody all excited. Why? What's the big deal?
Excited in both directions, like super happy and super sad. So interestingly, the original food pyramid that came about in 1991, if you look into the history of it, nobody actually really liked the food pyramid from the beginning. And one of the reasons they didn't like it is there were tiers to this pyramid. The base of it said 6 to 11 servings of grains, just as one obvious example. And people thought that was bewildering. And so when you actually read the details behind the graphic, it said, well, if you're a small, inactive person, you might need 6 servings. And if you're a large, super active person, you might need 11. And so after quite a few years, they actually got rid of the standard food pyramid and they made mypyramid.gov. And you got to go online for that one and say how big and how active you were. And then instead of getting a huge range, it said, oh, you should get 6 and you should get 8 and you should get 10. And so that was a little bit better, but at the end of the day, a lot of people didn't understand the pyramid and they thought, oh, the tip of the pyramid, that's the top. That must be the most important thing. So I'm going to go straight to the top and have the most of that. And the original intent had been that's the smallest part of the pyramid is the tip. And that's the thing you're supposed to have the least of. So in 2011, after 20 years, they completely abandoned the pyramid and came up with myplate.gov. And they said, oh, half your plate should be veggies and fruits, and the other half can be grains and protein sources. And a little circular thing of dairy on the side. And they said, these are simpler. Interestingly, if you clicked on either the pyramid or myplate.gov, there's a mind-numbing amount of detail. And the architecture never changed. It talked about lots of different things in very specific language.
Well, I have to tell you, Dr. Gardner, we have a break. We're going to stop for just a few seconds. But when we come back, we're going to talk about the new food pyramid and why are people so excited. So get ready. We're going to talk Food Pyramid 2026.
You're listening to Dr. Christopher Gardner, Director of Nutrition Studies at the Stanford Prevention Research Center. He's the Renborg Farquhar Professor of Medicine at Stanford University. Dr. Gardner has studied the effects of popular weight loss diets comparing low-fat to low-carb eating patterns.
After the break, we'll find out more about the new food pyramid and why they got rid of MyPlate.
What does it mean that the new guidelines tip the food pyramid upside down?
The new guidelines put a stronger focus on protein, especially animal protein.
Is protein in short supply in the American diet?
We'll also talk about breakfast. What's your favorite?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
Hey, want a cookie? Oh, I know you just ate, so you're craving something a little sweet. Besides, one cookie isn't gonna kill you. How about half? Just a bite? Bite it. Bite it. Bite it.
Food noise isn't fair, but Mochi Health is. Your affordable GLP-1 source that puts you on a path to successful weight loss by quieting food noise.
Bite it.
Shh. Learn more at joinmochi.com. Mochi members have access to licensed physicians and nutritionists. Results may vary.
So you're running out of closet space. The good news? You don't need to stop shopping. You just need to start selling with The RealReal. The RealReal is the world's largest and most trusted resource for authenticated luxury resale. Whether it's that mini bag that can't even fit your phone, or those boots you never fully broke in, The RealReal handles everything from photography and copywriting to shipping and pricing. So you can just sit back, get paid, and make room for things that actually feel like you. And with 10,000 plus new arrivals every single day from top designers like Prada, Celine, Louis Vuitton, and Loewe, all for up to 90% off retail, you're bound to find something perfectly on brand to fill that extra closet space with. Plus, right now, you can get an extra $100 to shop when you sell for the first time. Make room for what feels like you. Go to therealreal.com to start selling and get your extra $100 to keep shopping at therealreal.com. That's therealreal.com. Terms apply.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Sonu, an FDA-approved drug-free treatment for nasal congestion and runny nose, using sound instead of steroids. More at getsonu.com. That's getsonu.com.
The new dietary guidelines for Americans from 2025 to 2030 emphasize protein, especially animal protein. Are Americans really deficient in protein?
The theme of the guidelines is that we should eat real food. That's something we've been advocating here at the People's Pharmacy for decades.
Our guest is one of the country's leading nutrition experts. He's studied vegetarian diets, garlic, ginkgo biloba, fish oil, and other omega-3 fats, as well as a range of weight loss diets.
We're talking with Dr. Christopher Gardner, Director of Nutrition Studies at the Stanford Prevention Research Center. He's the Renborg Farquhar Professor of Medicine at Stanford University.
Dr. Gardner, Food Pyramid,
Yes.
2026. Why is everybody so excited? What's the deal on meat and dairy and...
And why did they give up on the plate?
Yep. So I have an opinion about that. It's my personal opinion. So I don't have any data to support this. Interestingly, this administration has been really gung-ho for getting at ultra-processed food. They ended up calling it highly processed food. At the end of the day, it's basically junk food that Americans have been eating too much for a really long time. And they said, we are on a mission here, and we're going to take this more seriously than any administration before us. We are going to make the most dramatic changes that have ever been witnessed in rewriting and shortening these guidelines. And to show you how revolutionary this is, let us show you the new graphic. So this is the pyramid on its head. We have flipped the entire thing upside down.
So it's teetering on the point of the triangle, right?
And I think it was meant to show that this is a really, really dramatic shift, and you should take note. We are super proud that we are taking this on for the first time. So the challenge there is, if you really look through all the details, most of it hasn't changed. So the very first recommendation is to not eat too many calories and to balance those out, to watch your weight. That's the same. The second one, let's come back to, it has to do with prioritizing protein every day. That is the one that has the most people curiously looking into the details. But then it says eat veggies and fruits, eat 4 servings of whole grains, don't eat too much added sugar, eat healthy fats. They added a cool thing about the gut for the microbiome. And most of the recommendations are really carried over from the past. The red meat and the prioritizing protein are 2 of the big changes. And the other one was for dairy, they very specifically said whole fat dairy and 3 servings a day. And for so long, the dairy part recommended low fat dairy. So those are the big changes. And I think there's about 12 different points. If you go through each one at a time, most of them are actually the same. It's not very radical. So my opinion of the flipped pyramid is it's sensationalist. It's to show how radically different things are. If you read through it, it's not really that different except for the protein and the whole fat dairy and kind of focusing on ultra processed food, but that's a separate topic. Keep going.
Let's talk about that protein focus, because my recollection is, and my memory's not perfect, but my recollection is that A long time ago, when we talked to you before, you said most Americans are getting already plenty of protein and don't really need to focus on getting more. A, was that true? And B, is it still true?
Was true, still is true, but it would be hard to know that going in any grocery store or crawling out from any rock and looking around right now, because everything says high protein. There's protein water, there's protein Pop-Tarts, there's protein cereal, there's protein soup. You would think as you go through the grocery store, I mean, tell me if you have experienced the same thing. I've seen so many foods in font 12. This is yogurt, this is grain, this is something else. But protein is in twice the size font of whatever the food is. Like, it seems to be more important that they tell you it has protein than they tell you what the food is actually itself. It's turned out to be an incredibly effective marketing tool. And so after seeing all the protein powder, all the protein bars, the David bar, which crammed more protein in a bar than anybody's ever managed to do before, only because of this bizarre undigestible fat that they added to it, which is super processed. They put all this protein in it. And then I think because they're saying, oh, you know what? The new target range is no longer, okay, now sorry for these units here, 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. I don't know if you want to stop and explain that, but that's just the general way they refer to it. It's no longer 0.8, it's 1.2 to 1.6, which kind of sounds like double. And my frustration as a public health person and a nutrition scientist is somebody's going to look at that and say, that's why there's protein in everything at the grocery store. Oh my God, for all these years, it's been wrong. They've only been telling us to get half the amount we need. And thank God they're labeling all that food in the grocery store. And thank God they brought red meat back, because as an American, for most Americans, when they think of protein, they think of meat. They don't really think of beans, legumes, peas, lentils, and
Peanut butter.
Joe and Terry. Yeah, that's been my push for years, is everything has protein in it. The dietary guidelines have always pointed out what the nutrients of concern are. And those have typically been fiber and calcium and vitamin D, and for infants and young kids, iron. Protein has never been a nutrient of concern that Americans aren't getting enough of. And so it is bizarre that they chose to do that. By the way, the National Academies is the one who comes up with the DRIs, the dietary reference intakes, where they actually list amounts of nutrients that you get. The dietary guidelines for Americans is separate. It's the USDA and Health and Human Services. And their main job is supposed to show you what servings of what foods would get those numbers for you. So it technically isn't their purview to be putting numbers in with their recommendations. So weird that they put numbers, weird that the numbers are double what they were when there isn't a protein problem. Weird that they brought red meat back in their new flipped pyramid. It is at the very top in the upper left. And when Americans read top to bottom and left to right, that is the first thing that they see, is this big thing of red meat, followed by a huge turkey and some other meat and whole fat dairy things. So that's what has people questioning, WTF, what happened? Was the science all wrong for all those years?
And of course, Americans have a hard time with the metric system, so trying to figure out grams per kilogram is a challenge.
And so they just look for the big font. Oh, okay, all I really know is it's protein. So I'm going to get my protein Pop-Tarts and my protein soup and my protein candy bar. And if somebody says, no, they said eat whole food. Oh, wait, no more junk food. Okay. And I personally, Joe and Terry, I do like the no junk food, less highly processed, less ultra processed food. But I think if they recognize how many of those high protein foods are junk foods, then they'll say, oh, well, thank God you clarified that. Now I know to get my meat. It's like, no, for the last 20 years, the dietary guidelines advisory committees have always said less meat, less red meat and processed meat in particular. And after handing it off to the Secretary of Ag, that was transferred to choose lean sources of meat instead of eating less red meat. So that went counter.
So, Dr. Gardner, let's move on to fat, because for years we were told low fat, no fat, that's the answer to good health. And there were all these dairy products. I mean, you had low fat yogurt, no fat cottage cheese. Oh, and milk, it's got to be low fat.
Or skim.
Skim milk is so much healthier than whole milk. And now they've turned that upside down. Did they get that right? Did they get that wrong? What does Dr. Christopher Gardner think about dairy?
Okay. Well, take one step back, because the fat thing was an oversimplification. They always meant saturated fat. And that seemed to be too much for the American public to handle. So the marketers said, let's just be more simplistic. Let's say less fat. And then quite immediately, the health community pushed back and said, no, that was supposed to be less meat and lard and butter and things like that. It was supposed to be less saturated fat, but olive oil, avocados, nuts and seeds, the unsaturated fats are okay. So let's just differentiate saturated from unsaturated. But Joe and Terry, dairy fat is a little different. So all the different fats have different lengths of carbon chains. And part of the reason butter smells like butter is butyric acid only has 4 carbons. It's a saturated fat, but there honestly aren't that many studies that are well done of something as super practical as whole milk versus skim milk in our school kids. So this is one of the main places where the battlegrounds lies, because one of those places where it really is having an impact is not, Terry, as you were saying, going to the street and looking both ways before you cross. This is like, what are schools allowed to buy? And it said schools can't buy whole fat dairy. Interestingly, schools could buy low fat dairy that was chocolate and full of sugar. And that's actually appalled many of us in the health community for many years. But let's say you got rid of the chocolate and the sugar and just had low fat milk versus whole fat milk. Believe it or not, there's almost no studies on that. But think about this. One of the main issues of saturated fat is cholesterol in the blood, which leads to heart disease. How many 12-year-olds have heart attacks? None. How many 15-year-olds? Okay, maybe 1 or 2. But the main way to look at that outcome of switching your saturated fat source for adults has been a quick blood draw to see what your LDL and HDL cholesterol are like. And nobody wants to let their kids go in for blood draws for drinking different kinds of milk. So I'm actually working with a group right now that's doing a really interesting low fat versus whole fat milk study in kids. But it's not cholesterol that it's the main outcome. It's lots of other possible health outcomes. And so the people who are pushing back on the whole fat dairy and saying it's okay are kind of within their right to do that, because there is not a strong evidence base against whole fat dairy in kids.
So they're saying it's okay, but what you're saying is we don't have the evidence to say it is or it isn't okay. And there are some people who worry that a very low-fat diet, if you're very young, 2, 3, 4, might not be good for your brain.
Yes, and that's actually what our Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee found out, that some of that whole fat dairy was better, especially for really young kids. So the idea is, what about middle school and high school? At what point does it switch over, if it switches over?
You've used that bad word, LDL cholesterol.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, with regard to, whole fat dairy. Now I want to switch for a moment because, we seem to demonize foods. There are good foods and there are bad foods. And for a long time, eggs were bad foods because they had cholesterol and because they would therefore cause heart attacks. Well, there is this rather interesting fellow, Dr. Nick Norwitz, MD, PhD. You may have heard of him at Harvard. I think he was at Harvard. But in any event, he started eating an enormous number of eggs, 24 eggs a day, 2 cartons of eggs for 30 days. That's
That's a lot of eggs.
720 eggs, 133,200 milligrams of cholesterol over the course of a month.
And most of us would never want to see another egg after we'd done that.
But he measured his LDL cholesterol. It went down. How could that be?
Oh, because they probably got less saturated fat in their diet. So the saturated fat in the diet has a more direct impact on the LDL cholesterol in your blood than the dietary cholesterol. And that's been known for decades. The liver actually makes a lot of cholesterol on a day-to-day basis, and all the cholesterol that you eat goes to the liver in your body before it goes anywhere else. And for most people, and maybe for Nick in particular, he's probably just a super efficient compensator. He says, oh, I don't need to make any liver cholesterol today. I ate 24 eggs today, so I'm just not going to make any internal cholesterol. And it's kind of a wash. So to be honest, Gerald Reaven, who's a Stanford professor and who is the godfather or the father, whatever you want to call it, of insulin resistance as it relates to things like LDL cholesterol and triglyceride. And he has passed away, bless his heart. He did one of the oldest studies where people had 900, 600, 300, or 0 milligrams of cholesterol a day, and it didn't impact their blood cholesterol. And you can add that to a dozen other studies that showed it's really not the cholesterol in your diet, it's the saturated fat. But it's kind of a moot point, Joe and Terry, because most things that have cholesterol also have saturated fat, with 2 exceptions. Are you ready? Drum roll. Eggs and shellfish have a ton of cholesterol, but they don't have much saturated fat. So they kind of got a bad rap from that whole saturated fat LDL cholesterol thing. And
well, I remember when we weren't supposed to eat shrimp.
Yeah, because of that. And so they're kind of off the hook. Now picture, so I don't know if you know this, Joe and Terry, but maybe when I was talking to you last, which was a while ago, my 2 favorite terms now are instead of what and with what. And eggs are my favorite example. So picture scrambled eggs, or picture egg McMuffin, or picture eggs with sausage and bacon versus an omelet with veggies in it and salsa on top. Picture cheesy eggs with sausage and bacon. So is it really just the eggs, or is it that you had eggs with cheese, with bacon, with sausage? And
Or
that
Dr. Christopher
breakfast-
Gardner, our favorite, Joe's favorite breakfast specifically
I'm ready.
is refried beans. I saute some onions in a little olive oil, and then I put in the refried beans. And then when the refried beans are all nice and warm, I cook an egg on top. And that's how
Yeah.
we have our eggs.
And I like peppers as well.
Oh, yeah.
It's like it gets me through at least half a day or longer. It's wonderful. Well, we do need to take another break. When we come back, we want to talk about weight loss. We want to talk about Christopher Gardner's favorite foods. We want to talk about the future of the food industry. So keep those thoughts. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Dr. Christopher Gardner, Director of Nutrition Studies at the Stanford Prevention Research Center. He is the Renborg Farquhar Professor of Medicine at Stanford University.
After the break, we'll talk about the obesity epidemic. Are there some dietary patterns that make it easier to lose weight?
Dr. Gardner's research has shown that lots of different diets can contribute to good health throughout the lifespan.
How can people find out which diet works best for them?
The new dietary guidelines suggest that kids should not have any food with added sugar until they're 10 years old. That would be a big change.
Find out about the risks and the benefits of the new food pyramid.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Sonu, an FDA-approved drug-free treatment for nasal congestion and runny nose, using sound instead of steroids. More at getsonu.com. That's getsonu.com.
And by Spatial Sleep, a non-drug approach to help you fall asleep and stay asleep without medications. More information at spatialsleep.com.
Have you ever tried to lose weight by focusing on a particular dietary approach? Did it work? Some people embrace the low-carb Atkins approach, while others sing the praises of the Dean Ornish low-fat strategy. Is there one best diet for everyone?
Today, we're talking about the food fight over dietary guidelines for Americans. The food pyramid was flipped upside down. How will that affect your food choices?
We are talking with Dr. Christopher Gardner, a leading nutrition researcher. He's the director of nutrition studies at the Stanford Prevention Research Center and the Renborg Farquhar Professor of Medicine at Stanford University.
Dr. Gardner, it is no secret that one of the biggest problems for Americans in terms of diet and health is that there's too much obesity. People are too fat. People are eating too much, or else they're eating the wrong things. So are there dietary patterns that make it easier to lose weight? We know you have done some research in this regard.
Oh, I did a lot. Yeah. So we've had 1,000 people across 2 different studies where we did a lot of focus on low fat and low carb. And we compared them head to head, and drum roll, pretty much a wash. They both on average lead to about the same amount of weight loss, and almost everybody loses weight on them, especially if they're healthy. So our second of the 2 studies was one where we had a healthy low fat and a healthy low carb. And the average weight loss was the same. But Joe and Terry, what was stunning was always the range of response to that. So some of the participants gained weight and some lost a lot of weight on both diets. And so a lot of people have been looking for personalization of diets. So is there, maybe insulin resistant people do better on low carb and insulin sensitive people do better on low fat. That was our main hypothesis in the study, and it failed when it was a healthy low carb and a healthy low fat. At one point, we thought genetic predisposition might be part of this, and so we got what we thought were low carb predisposed people and low fat predisposed people, and that also failed. So everybody's been looking sort of for this magic bullet. Is it the carbs, fats, and protein? Let me just go to protein for a second. We never focused on the protein, but I will say that I looked at our 2 studies and several other studies, and I know protein is a huge craze, and in theory, protein is satiating and helping people out. But when we looked at a bunch of studies a year or 2 years out, almost every group, no matter how good they were at getting lower in carb or lower in fat, ended up almost exactly at 20% protein. Even the most famous study out there called Pounds Lost that had a 15% protein diet and a 25% protein diet. In the beginning, when they were excited about it, they did that. But a year or 2 out, they were both at 20%. So you could talk about whether high or low protein has a difference. But when you actually watch people over time, it kind of nullifies. They end up at the same level of protein. So I don't think it's a macronutrient thing. I think you can do pretty much any of the popular diets out there and find that it works for someone. And sadly, I wish the health professionals had better advice, but you're kind of going to have to biohack and figure out which one works the best for you. A lot of health professionals say the best diet to be on is the one that you can maintain for a really long time. So if this is culturally adapted to your preferences, you like the taste, it works in social settings, it works with your family, all those are probably, I think, more important than low carb or low fat or high protein.
We just saw a study published in Science Advances that looked at 5 different types of presumably healthful diet, and found that actually people who did well on any of these diets were likely to live longer. So it looks as though there's quite a range of diets that can be healthful, that can contribute to good health into your later years. And that kind of makes sense if you think about human evolution. I mean, humans around the world have eaten a pretty wide range of diets and done well on them until, of course, we got to the junk food.
Absolutely. And really, that's the key. It really isn't low carb or low fat or high protein. It's how much. I mean, this is my biggest concern always: added sugar and refined grain, the carbs that have a lot of calories and very little fiber to no fiber, and not very many nutrients that come with it. So one of my favorite publications is from the Harvard group that looked at NHANES, the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, over a course of 20 years to see if there were any trends, not just in protein, carbs, and fats, but type of protein, type of carb, and type of fat. And over 20 years, there were some very, very modest differences in all of those. But what's most stunning about the graphic that they show of this is when they say 3 types of fat, saturated, mono, and poly, is like 10% of calories from each one of those. It's about 10% of calories from animal protein and maybe 5 to 8 of plant protein. We're still in the 10 range. About 10% of calories from good quality carbohydrates that have fiber in them. Okay, that's 10. Oh, that adds up to 60. 40% of calories from added sugar and refined grains. That is the problem. And that's why low carb sounds very popular. If the low carb is getting rid of the added sugars and the refined grains, everybody wins. The question is, what do you replace that 40% of your calories with? Hopefully you don't replace them all. Then you'll be in calorie deficit. That will help you lose weight. But let's say you replaced 30 of the 40. Here's my biohack to it. I think somebody can do that in a healthy way and have 10 come from more carbs, 10 come from more protein, and 10 come from more fat, or 30% from fat, or 30% from carbs, as long as it's healthy carbs or healthy fat. So that actually gives you a whole bunch of different ways to go lower carb, but replace it all with healthy foods that are healthy sources of carbs, healthy sources of fat, and healthy sources of protein, which for me is beans, peas, and lentils, which bring fiber along with the protein.
We know that you are a peas, beans, and greens kind of guy, and we love that about you. I'm interested in how people can biohack their way to success. How do you find out what's going to be best for you? You talked a little earlier about insulin sensitivity and insulin resistance, and that's a really big deal in metabolism these days. But how do you know what works best for you? There's got to be some kind of a process. Some people are wearing CGMs, continuous glucose monitors, to try and figure out what works. And what I discovered, by the way, is that when I have oatmeal for breakfast, my blood glucose goes pretty high pretty fast.
And that's even though I'm cooking steel-cut oats. It's not like instant sugary oatmeal.
And we had a diabetes expert who said, don't worry about it. That's fine. Just eat your oats and you'll be great. But if I have those refried beans with an egg, onions, and peppers, my blood glucose doesn't go anywhere. It just stays rock solid. So help us figure out how to biohack our way to good health.
And you sauteed those onions, right?
Yes.
And bell peppers in
Yes.
oil.
Yeah,
Yes.
olive oil.
So you had fat. And
Yes.
if you had a fatty oatmeal breakfast, so what if you put a whole bunch of walnuts and nuts in there on top
Actually,
of
I do that sometimes.
right? And so the idea is it isn't really just the one thing. First of all, so actually, Joe, let me just ask, do you have an issue with glucose? Or
Nope.
are you
Nope.
Okay.
I mean, my glucose is usually pretty under control, like in the 90s to 100 range. And after breakfast, if I have my, refried beans and egg, it may go up to 105 or 110. But if I have that oatmeal, it'll go up to 130 or 140.
So I'm worried that a lot of people who actually don't have glucose problems are playing with the CGMs and taking it too seriously, and they're trying to completely blunt any response, any glucose spike, which is ridiculous because your body is prepared to have carbs and fats and proteins. And when you have carbs, you will get a glucose spike. You will make insulin, you'll put it away, and then the insulin gets broken down and the glucose is out of your blood. If you try too hard to have no glucose spike at all, you're going overboard. That's too much. But when you're just talking about how do you biohack, in theory, you could make sure you don't get a really high peak. I actually think the bigger thing that we should try to biohack right now, Joe and Terry, is satiety. What makes you full? I actually asked this at a couple of conferences, and I said, what would make you the most full and keep you full for the next hour or two? First, I'm going to tell you oatmeal with some fresh fruit and some nuts and maybe some whole fat yogurt on there. And a bunch of people raised their hand, versus eggs. That's an omelet with some salsa and some veggies in there. And a whole bunch of people raised their hand. I said, isn't there one breakfast that makes everybody full? And I gave a couple options. And no, different people, different things are satiating for different people. And so there's two aspects of this satiety. One is, when do you stop eating because you're full? And when do you eat again next because you're hungry again? So there are some things that, because of bulk, fill you up, but then an hour later, you're hungry again.
I'm guessing you would not recommend Pop-Tarts for breakfast.
The American breakfast for how many years has been carb on carb on carb. We have a sugary cereal, we have a piece of white bread, we put jelly on it with a glass of orange juice. That's just simple carbs. So yes, as soon as you switch from that to your beans and eggs, or to your cheesy eggs with bacon and sausage, you would be more full. But I would say switch from that American sugary breakfast to your beans and eggs, not the cheesy eggs with bacon and sausage. But you'll have to biohack that out for yourself and look at your numbers with your doctor for your cholesterol and your blood pressure and the things that we measure typically.
Dr. Gardner, I would like to go back to the new dietary guidelines for just a moment. It is related to what you're talking about. We know that a lot of kids eat those Pop-Tarts and sugary cereals and so forth. And my understanding is that the new dietary guidelines suggest that kids should not be eating any foods with added sugar until they're at least 10 years old. A, have I got it wrong? And B, is that a good idea? And is it practical?
So it's a great idea. The challenge is going to be, and this is what I'd really like to see. So I really admire the new administration for putting greater emphasis on this. It's just obscene and insane how much added sugar kids are eating, and adults as well. And also, the deal with ultra-processed food and cosmetic additives and things like red color dye. And so I know the administration said, all right, no more of these dyes. And as far as I know, M&Ms and Skittles are still colored the same way. And if they say no sugary things in schools, I have a feeling that if they recommend that, schools are going to need more money to buy more whole foods. And so part of the reason those foods are there, Joe and Terry, is because they're inexpensive. They have a long shelf life for people with limited resources. Or for places like schools, they buy them because that's what they have the budget for. So I totally applaud this idea of getting rid of as many added sugars as we can. But it will really take some regulatory force that I haven't seen yet to have more, for example, farm-to-table food. I know that the administration took away $1 billion of farm-to-school money recently, where it was going to come fresh from the farm. I know that some of the other safety net food money has been taken away. So you'd have to say, yes, get rid of the sugars. And there's going to be some regulations so that the food industry has its feet held to the fire and they can't make these anymore. They can't sell these. And the immediate response, as has always been the case, is going to be, this is capitalism. We can make what we want and sell what we want as long as people will buy it. That's where the tension will be, not on the recommendation to avoid them, but on the power to change the food environment we all live in. That's hey, if you come up with something clever and can sell it, that's the way capitalism works. That's a big lift.
Dr. Gardner, one of the most controversial areas in your field these days is fat. And I think a lot of people were told for a very long time, no fat, low fat is the answer. And so we saw all kinds of products that were marketed as low fat, no fat. And that has changed. And so you now will see all kinds of products out there that will say, okay, we make our ice cream with avocado oil. It's like, oh, okay, instead of dairy, it's avocado. Interesting. And
It's good.
but I want to get your feedback. What kind of oils are you cooking with? What do you put on your salad dressings? And what's the deal on olive oil? Because I think everybody goes, yeah, olive oil's the greatest, but it does have some saturated fat in it. So help us understand the Christopher Gardner perspective on oils and fat.
Sure, I have very fatty foods. I put lots of avocado, lots of nuts and seeds. I drench my salads in olive oil or some kind of vinaigrette made with olive oil. Olive oil is pretty expensive, the good quality olive oil. So is avocado oil. And so, to be honest, canola, sunflower, safflower, there's this whole bizarre seed oil debacle that's just wrong, but it would take me more than 10 seconds to tell you why it's wrong. All those unsaturated cooking, seasoning, salad dressing oils are fine, but please keep in mind that all of them have higher and lower quality, and the higher quality oils cost more. So when you're like, there's this thing about seed oils that's been going around, and it's true, as you take a seed and you crush it in different ways, you get the oil out. And if it's a first press or if it's a cold press, that's the best quality. At some level, somebody goes along at the end of the day and squeezes the last little bit out of those seeds and puts in hexane and charcoal and bleaching to squeeze the last bit out. And that's a lower quality oil, and it will cost less. And so all of those oils have higher and lower qualities, and it's pretty snooty to say only buy the high quality oils. So there's a lot of things you can have that have unsaturated fat, like avocados and nuts and seeds. Those are not cheap either if you buy good quality avocados and nuts and seeds. But I do a lot with the American Heart, and the American Heart for decades has embraced a high unsaturated fat Mediterranean type diet that includes fatty fish too.
If we were to sit down at your table invisibly and just watch, what is Christopher Gardner eating on a regular basis? Walk us through breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or perhaps just breakfast and lunch. But just tell us, what are the foods that you're putting into your groceries bag and taking home, and what are you making most often? What are your favorites?
Okay, yeah. And did you know, I actually have a book coming out soon, and I put all my favorite recipes in the
that's
book.
wonderful.
Well, you've got to put us on your list because we would love to talk and see that book. So make sure we get a hold of that book as soon as it's available. But tell us the good stuff.
Okay, coming out in October, you'll see that I have a couple of very basic breakfasts. One is steel-cut oats with berries and nuts and soy milk and a little shaved dried coconut and cacao beans and Then another one is I make this scrambled tofu dish. So I put in onions and bell peppers, and I put some greens in there like kale or chard, and then I mash up some tofu. And even though I'm not trying to fool myself, I put turmeric in there and nutritional yeast so it looks kind of like scrambled eggs with veggies in it. Another one is an avocado toast with kimchi on it, because I actually study the microbiome now, and that's one of the ways I get fermented food into my breakfast is to have avocado toast with kimchi. So those are 3 of my standard breakfasts.
Wait, tell me about the toast.
And the toast is a whole grain bread, whatever the most whole grain thing that I can find is, which is way more expensive than the wheat bread in the grocery store. That's not really whole wheat bread. It's just wheat.
Terry is taken to baking bread, and her whole wheat bread is phenomenal.
Nice.
And speaking of not inexpensive, I like to buy stone ground flour from a local miller at the farmer's market. So I'm paying extra for my flour, but I'm putting the labor in myself.
Yeah. See, so that labor or that time or that money, it all costs. If you want to talk about lunches, I'm looking at my favorite lunch. So salad. Oh, because salad is anything. There's a grain-based salad. I make a really good wheat berry salad. Today, downstairs, I went and got the regular lettuce salad. I'm just looking right now what I have. I have shaved almonds. I have garbanzo beans. I have edamame. I have tofu. I have bell pepper, carrots, red bell pepper. I have beets in it. I have cucumber in it. Just a lot of veggies and nuts and seeds and crunch and color. My salads are really beautiful. I make a really good squash eggplant tempeh dish that has a pomegranate glaze. That's one of my favorites that I make at home. So those are some of the favorite kind of things that I make. Is that enough for now?
That's great.
Perfect.
Thank you.
And when that cookbook is available, we'd love to talk to you about it.
And it's not a cookbook. It's called Food Sense. And actually, it's got a chapter on protein, a chapter on seed oil, a chapter on organic, my journey as a food scientist. And at the end are my favorite recipes.
Christopher, we've got 1 minute left. And so I need you to summarize the benefits and risks of the new food pyramid and what you would like to see for the future.
Yeah, I love the eat real food. So if everybody would eat real food, let's do that. I think one of our strongest recommendations from the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee was to eat more legumes, beans, peas, and lentils, and less red meat. I think they really got that one wrong. And for the dairy, I think we should all recognize that 3/4 of the world is lactose intolerant. And so I don't think the issue is whole fat versus skim. I think it's that most of the world can't handle dairy, and it's pretty insensitive to suggest that everybody get 3 servings of dairy a day. Fall back on more veggies and fruits, more whole grains, more beans, peas, and lentils, more nuts and seeds, and we'll be okay.
Dr. Christopher Gardner, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Pleasure to be back. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Dr. Christopher Gardner. He's a nutrition researcher and the director of nutrition studies at the Stanford Prevention Research Center. Dr. Gardner is the Renborg Farquhar Professor of Medicine at Stanford University. He's focused his research on the potential health benefits of various dietary components or food patterns using randomized controlled trials. The interventions have involved vegetarian diets, soy, garlic, omega-3 fats or fish oil, antioxidants, ginkgo biloba, and popular weight loss diets.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wadarski engineered. Dave Graydon edits our interviews. B.J. Liederman composed our theme music.
This show is a co-production of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC, with the People's Pharmacy.
Today's show is number 1465. You can find it online at peoplespharmacy.com. That's where you can share your comments about this episode. You can also reach us through email, radio@peoplespharmacy.com.
Our interviews are available through your favorite podcast provider. You'll find the podcast on our website on Monday morning. This week's podcast also has information on the controversy over fats. Which oils does Dr. Gardner use for cooking or salad dressing? We'll get hints on his favorite foods for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You could also watch the interview on YouTube. Look for the People's Pharmacy.
At peoplespharmacy.com, you could sign up for our free online newsletter to get the latest news about important health stories. When you subscribe, you also have regular access to information about our weekly podcast. We would be grateful if you would write a review of the People's Pharmacy and post it to the podcast platform you prefer. If you find our topics interesting, please share them with friends and family. In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thank you for listening. Please join us again next week. Thank you for listening to the People's Pharmacy Podcast. It's an honor and a pleasure to bring you our award-winning program week in and week out. But producing and distributing this show as a free podcast takes time and costs money.
If you like what we do and you'd like to help us continue to produce high-quality, independent healthcare journalism, please consider chipping in.
All you have to do is go to peoplespharmacy.com/donate.
Whether it's just one time or a monthly donation, you can be part of the team that makes this show possible. Thank you for your continued loyalty and support. We couldn't make our show without you.